They say you never forget the first time you see your parents through your child's eyes. I always thought that meant watching them hold your newborn, rocking them gently, singing lullabies in the same cracked voices they once sang to you. I thought it meant legacy, love passed down like a torch. But for me, it meant something else entirely. It meant watching my 7-year-old daughter stand frozen, her lip trembling as her grandparents, the very people who were supposed to love her unconditionally, used their words like knives. It meant realizing, in a single terrible instant, that history wasn't just repeating itself. It was mutating, spreading like poison into the next generation. The day started like any other family visit. We were at my parents' house, a neat little suburban home that smelled faintly of bleach and coffee. My mother had insisted we come over for Sunday lunch, like old times. Against my better judgment, I agreed. My daughter, Emma, was excited. She had dressed herself in her favorite yellow dress, the one with tiny daisies stitched along the hem. She even packed a drawing she'd made of all of us holding hands. For the first half hour, everything seemed fine, too fine, really. My mother complimented my dress. My father laughed too loudly at Emma's silly jokes, and there was an unnatural brightness in the air, like a stage play where everyone knew their lines. I should have known it wouldn't last. It started when Emma accidentally spilled her juice. Just a splash, nothing dramatic. She gasped, embarrassed, and grabbed a napkin to wipe it up. Before I could even reassure her, my mother snapped. "Look at this mess. You're just as clumsy as your mother was. Can't you do anything right?" Emma's face fell, the light dimming from her eyes. My father chuckled, as if it were some grand joke. Runs in the family, I guess. Always disappointing. Something inside me cracked. I wanted to scream, to snatch my daughter and leave, but I froze. Maybe it was the years of conditioning, the endless cycle of criticism disguised as humor, discipline wrapped in cruelty. For a second, I was 10 years old again, shrinking under their words. But then I saw Emma, really saw her. She was holding back tears, her little hand still clutching the damp napkin. That was the moment everything shifted. I put on a smile. Calm, practiced, deliberate smile. "It's fine," I said softly, patting Emma's shoulder. "Accidents happen." Then, turning to my parents, I added, "Don't worry about it. We'll clean it up." I don't think they noticed the way my voice had changed, but Emma did. She looked up at me with wide, searching eyes, and I gave her a small nod. Promise. Lunch continued, but the warmth was gone. Every word my parents spoke was another small cut. They criticized Emma's posture, the way she held her fork, even the picture she had drawn. "That doesn't even look like us," my mother scoffed. "Maybe next time try harder." Emma's cheeks burned, and she tucked the drawing under her plate, as if to hide it. And that was it. The decision was made in that instant, though I didn't let it show. I laughed at their comments, pretended to brush them off, even joked along. My parents thought they had won, that I was still the obedient daughter who swallowed insults like bitter medicine. But inside, I was already planning. I knew one thing for certain. They would never make Emma feel as small and broken as they once made me feel. Not again. And if they thought forgiveness was a gift I would hand them easily, they were about to learn what real forgiveness looked like, because mine would come dressed in revenge. The strange thing about revenge is that it rarely starts loud. It begins as a quiet seed, buried deep in your chest, watered by every cruel word and every memory of humiliation. That Sunday lunch was the seed for me. I drove Emma home in silence, letting her chatter about her dolls fill the car while my mind churned with thoughts sharp enough to cut glass. She was resilient, kids often are, but I could see the shadows forming in her. The way she hesitated before speaking, the way she asked if she could draw something better next time. That hesitation was my childhood replaying itself in her small body, and I swore then and there that it would stop with me. For the next few weeks, I did something my parents never expected. I played along. I called them often, smiled when they criticized, nodded when they made backhanded remarks. I pretended to forgive, to forget, to fall back into the familiar rhythm of their control. They believed me. Of course they did. Narcissists always believe their mask of superiority is unbreakable. But behind that mask, I was working. The truth is, my parents cared about two things more than anything else: reputation and control. They had built their lives around appearances: perfect holiday photos, spotless homes, exaggerated tales of success at family reunions. They needed everyone to see them as the ideal parents, the perfect couple. And I knew exactly how to use that against them. Started small. I began inviting them to Emma's school events, letting them believe they were still important in our lives. At first, they played the doting grandparents, smiling for pictures, patting Emma's head in front of other parents. But their sharp tongues never stayed hidden for long. I watched carefully, documenting every cruel slip. Every time they belittled Emma in front of teachers. Every time they made me the punchline of their jokes. What they didn't know was that Emma's school principal was an old college friend of mine. She had witnessed enough of their behavior to raise an eyebrow, and I made sure she saw just enough to understand. At the same time, I started reconnecting with family members I hadn't spoken to in years. Cousins, aunts, uncles. People who had all been pushed away by my parents' arrogance. I didn't paint myself as the victim. I didn't have to. I simply let small truths slip during conversations. My parents' cruelty spoke for itself, and soon the cracks in their image began to show. But revenge isn't just about tearing down someone else. It's about building something stronger for yourself. And that was the part my parents never saw coming. I began encouraging Emma to draw more, praising her work, hanging it proudly on our fridge. When she nervously showed me a messy watercolor of our cat, I told her it was beautiful and meant it. Slowly, I watched her confidence bloom where my own had once been stomped flat. She stopped asking if things were good enough and started saying, "Look what I made." Every time she smiled with pride, I felt another piece of my parents' power over me shatter. But the real turning point came 1 month later at my father's retirement party. It was supposed to be a grand event: friends, colleagues, extended family. My parents had spared no expense, hiring a photographer, booking a fancy hall, even printing a slideshow of his legacy. I knew it was the perfect stage. They expected me to sit quietly, smiling in the background, just as I had at countless other events. But this time I was ready. When the microphone was passed to me for the obligatory daughter's speech, I stood up with a calm smile. My parents beamed, thinking I would shower them with praise. Instead, I told the truth. Not cruelly, not with screaming or tears, just calmly, steadily, like a story finally being set free. I spoke about my childhood, about the constant criticism, about the way love had always been conditional. I spoke about the day Emma spilled her juice and how history almost repeated itself. The room went silent. My parents' smiles faltered. My father's hand gripped his glass a little too tightly. I didn't expose every detail, not yet. But I said enough for everyone to understand that the perfect image my parents had built was a facade. And then I ended with one sentence that landed heavier than any insult I could have thrown. I will always choose protecting my child over preserving anyone else's reputation. Applause followed. Not the thunderous kind, but the soft, respectful kind that says, "We hear you. We believe you." My parents' faces flushed with embarrassment. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one shrinking in shame. That was only the beginning. After that night, the silence from my parents was louder than any argument we had ever had. They didn't call, didn't text, didn't even send a message pretending to smooth things over. For people obsessed with control, my speech had been the ultimate betrayal, because I had taken back the narrative they had written for me my whole life. But my revenge wasn't complete yet. You see, my parents had always prided themselves on being the pillars of the community. They sat on committees, attended charity galas, and played the role of generous benefactors. What no one knew, except me, was that much of their generosity came with strings attached. Promises they never kept, donations that were more about appearances than kindness. And because I had played the obedient daughter for months, they had grown careless around me again. My mother would complain about how exhausting it was to pretend to care about her volunteer work. My father boasted about how he'd manipulated people at his job to secure favors. They didn't realize I was listening carefully, documenting every word. Piece by piece, I collected proof. Emails my father had left open on his computer when I visited. Text messages my mother had carelessly sent while gossiping about relatives. Financial records that didn't quite add up. I didn't need to twist the knife. Their own arrogance gave me all the ammunition I needed. But here's the thing. Revenge is sweetest when it's silent. When your enemy doesn't even see the blade until it's already cut deep. Instead of launching a public attack, I started small. Anonymous tips to the organizations they were part of. Screenshots forwarded to family members who had long suspected the truth. Gentle nudges in the right direction, and suddenly the image my parents had built began to collapse. The whispers started first. A canceled committee seat. Invitations that mysteriously stopped arriving. Friends who became too busy to meet. My parents, for the first time in their lives, were losing control of the story. And then came the final act. Emma's school held its annual art fair a few months later, and she had been working tirelessly on a series of drawings. She wanted to display them, but she was nervous. Afraid, I knew, of my parents showing up and mocking her again. So I did something different. I invited them personally. When the night came, Emma stood proudly beside her art display, surrounded by her friends and their parents. The room was warm with laughter, full of encouragement and joy. And then my parents walked in, stiff and brittle, already the subject of half-hidden stares from people who had heard enough rumors to doubt them. They walked over to Emma's table, and for the first time, I saw hesitation in their eyes. They looked at her drawings, colorful, imperfect, beautiful in their honesty. Emma looked up at them, waiting, almost bracing for the sting of their words. And that's when I delivered the final strike. With a calm smile, I said loudly enough for those around us to hear, "These are Emma's drawings. She's proud of them, and so am I. And if anyone can't appreciate the courage it takes to share your heart on paper, then perhaps they don't belong here." The words weren't cruel. They weren't dramatic. But they carried the weight of every moment I had been silenced as a child. The weight of every bruise to my confidence. Every time I was told I wasn't enough. Around us, parents nodded. Teachers smiled. And Emma, my sweet daughter, beamed with pride. My parents, they froze. For the first time, they were the outsiders, the unwelcome voices in a space that thrived on love instead of judgment. They left early that night. Quietly. No scene, no argument. Just the slow, heavy walk of people who realized the power they once held had slipped away forever. And that was the real revenge. Not shouting. Not humiliation. But stripping them of the one thing they valued most. Control. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to fight. I simply lived differently. Proudly, honestly, free from the chains they had wrapped around me for so long. My daughter learned that night what I had spent years trying to teach her. That cruelty is not power. That silence in the face of abuse is not peace. That the strongest revenge is building a life so full of love that those who tried to destroy you become irrelevant. When Emma hugged me after the fair, she whispered, "Mom, I'm glad you're proud of me." And in that moment, I knew the cycle was broken. I had pretended to forgive my parents, and for a while they believed it. But my true forgiveness wasn't for them. It was for myself. For the little girl who had once cowered under their words. And for the woman who finally stood tall. Revenge, after all, doesn't always come in fire and fury. Sometimes it comes in the quiet rebuilding of everything they tried to destroy. And in my case, it came in the smile of a child who finally knew she was enough.